Sometimes the quietest man in the room carries the loudest secrets. At a Navy base in Hawaii, a humble single-dad janitor with tired eyes and a gentle smile tries to live an invisible life. But when a group of SEALs mock him and a four-star general notices something strange in the way he stands, an old buried truth begins to claw its way back to the surface. And when 5 four-star generals suddenly land on base and salute him, the entire world realizes this man is not who they think he is. Before we begin, if you enjoy emotional healing, cinematic stories filled with kindness, second chances, and quiet heroes, feel free to subscribe to our channel. It helps us continue creating meaningful stories that touch the heart. Now, let's begin. The morning sun rose slowly over Pearl Harbor, casting a soft, golden sheen across the naval base, as if Hawaii itself were exhaling into another day of duty, discipline, and unspoken burdens. Sailors marched, officers briefed, engines hummed, but amid the rhythms of military life, one man moved differently. Brandon Cross pushed a janitor's cart along the corridor of the Joint Cyber Command Wing. Steps, steady shoulders, relaxed eyes, calm in a way that didn't quite fit his uniform, or rather, the lack of it. He wore faded fatigues under a plain white janitor's apron, sleeves rolled up forearms, lean and scarred. His hair brushed his collar sun-touched and slightly wavy, giving him the look of someone who once lived outdoors, more than indoors. Most janitors blended into the background. Brandon didn't. People couldn't explain why. They only felt it. Maybe it was the way he stood balanced, centered like nothing could knock him off his axis. Maybe it was the quiet alertness in his eyes, a depth that suggested he carried stories too heavy to tell. Maybe it was how he scanned a room, not nervously but knowingly. He wasn't intimidating. He wasn't loud. He wasn't trying to be anything. But something about him whispered, "Soldier, not janitor." Brandon stopped his cart near a bank of computer terminals. The technicians inside were already buried in their monitors trying to correct a satellite drift issue that had persisted since dawn. He didn't speak. He simply grabbed his mop, wrung it out slowly, and began working along the edges of the glossy floor, letting the steady motion settle his mind. "Dad," a small voice chirped behind him. "Sophie?" Brandon turned, and for a moment, the weight in his eyes softened. The 8-year-old girl with chestnut hair, tied in a loose ponytail, peered up at him, with the kind of smile that made strangers smile too. She wore a purple backpack far too big for her, but she carried it with the confidence of a child who believed her father could fix anything. "You forgot your lunch," she said proudly, holding up a small container wrapped in a cloth. "And the oatmeal cookie I saved for you." Brandon crouched, brushing a strand of her hair behind her ear. "You're a lifesaver, sweetheart. You always say that." "That's because it's always true." Sophie giggled and hugged him tightly before running toward the exit where Mrs. Kealoha, the base's longtime childcare supervisor, waited. Brandon watched her go, eyes soft, but shadowed. That shadow never left, not fully. It lingered beneath the gentleness, like a scar beneath a shirt. As he turned back to his cart, a figure paused at the far end of the corridor, still as a statue, unreadable as a locked vault. General Megan Drake. 4 stars gleamed on her collar. The weight of command, of expectations, of decades of iron discipline radiated from her presence. Yet her face carried something quieter, the solitude of someone who had forgotten how to live outside the uniform. She had seen Brandon interact with Sophie. She had seen the way his eyes changed, and she had felt unexpectedly a pull inside her chest. Megan had crossed paths with countless men in uniform SEALs, Rangers, Admirals, intelligence chiefs. But the janitor with the quiet eyes, he unsettled her. Not in a threatening way, but in a way she couldn't categorize. and Megan Drake despised things she couldn't categorize. Her gaze followed him as he moved along the hall, pushing the cart to the next section. His posture was too perfect, his movements too economical, his awareness too sharp. Something about him burned with a faint familiarity, like a ghost of a memory she couldn't quite grasp. A senior officer brushed past her, saluting. "Morning, ma'am." She nodded automatically but kept watching Brandon. The janitor. The man with the quiet eyes. She didn't know it yet, but her instinct, sharper than radar honed by decades of leadership, had already marked him as wrong. Not dangerous, not suspicious, but wrong for the role he played. A janitor wasn't supposed to carry himself like he once commanded storms. Brandon sensed her gaze before he actually turned. Years of training, buried training, never truly left. He lifted his eyes, met Megan's for half a second, and dipped his head in a respectful, humble nod. Then he went back to work. Megan's heart dropped an inch, because in that fraction of a second, she saw something she had never expected recognition. Not of her rank, not of her authority. Recognition of her as a person. No fear, no awe, no hesitation. Just two souls crossing paths for a moment, quietly, simply before returning to their own worlds. Megan found herself taking a half step forward, as if something inside insisted she move, speak, ask. But then a pair of officers approached her with briefing folders, snapping her back into duty. "General, the 0900 satellite report. I'll read it in my office," she said, without looking away from Brandon. By the time she turned back fully, he had already vanished into another corridor, cartwheels, echoing gently behind him. The rest of the morning crawled by with meetings, reports, and endless decisions, but Megan couldn't fully focus. Brandon lingered in her thoughts, like a whisper at the edge of a closed door. Who was he? Why did she feel drawn? By noon, she caught herself standing at her office window, watching him sweep the courtyard below, with Emma, the younger janitor, chatting beside him. He laughed at something she said, but it wasn't a loud laugh. It was soft, like a man unused to joy but grateful when it visited. Megan's chest tightened again inexplicably. Then she scolded herself. What was she doing? He was a 4-star general, the highest-ranking female officer in the Pacific command structure. She had no business wondering why a janitor had eyes like that. She had no business feeling anything at all. Still, something about him refused to be dismissed. Something that made her feel for the first time in a long time that perhaps she wasn't as unshakable as she believed. That evening, while Brandon wiped down the stainless steel railings, the base lights flickered for a moment. A tiny anomaly, hardly noticeable. But Brandon noticed. He paused, frowning slightly, gaze drifting toward the high-security wing, where rows of screens glowed blue through the glass. Something was off. Something subtle, familiar, like the faint echo of a world he had walked away from, but which never truly let go. He inhaled slowly, deeply. Then he went back to cleaning as if nothing had happened. But his eyes, they weren't quiet anymore. They were watching, waiting. Because a man who once lived in the shadows never stopped sensing when the shadows began moving again. The next morning arrived with the crisp bite of ocean air sweeping across the Hawaii base, carrying with it a sense of restless energy. The Joint Cyber Command wing buzzed louder than usual, satellite anomalies, night shift fatigue, and the endless churn of military urgency. Sailors and officers hurried between terminals, their footsteps echoing off the polished floors that Brandon Cross had quietly cleaned only hours earlier. Brandon moved through the main control center with his mop and cart as he always did, steady, unnoticed, blending into the rhythm of the place. His eyes tracked patterns the way a hawk tracks currents. He heard things differently too, not with curiosity, but with quiet analysis, as if every sound, every tone, every tension in a room meant something. And today, something in the air felt unsettled. Sophie had clung to him longer than usual, before school drop-off, saying she had a bad feeling. Brandon had kissed her forehead and promised everything would be fine. But even now, her small, trembling voice lingered in the back of his mind. He crossed the threshold into the control hub and instantly sensed a tension turn toward him. A group of young SEALs lounged near the central console bank in their sand-colored uniforms. They were new to the base, loud, confident, each one broadcasting the brashness of men who hadn't yet learned the weight of consequences. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a jaw that looked carved from concrete, nudged his buddy and jerked his chin toward Brandon. "Hey, Janitor," the SEAL called out. Brandon didn't react. Not yet. He continued wiping down the nearby counter, giving the young man the dignity of being ignored first. But the SEAL wasn't finished. He smirked, leaning forward, voice louder. "Yeah, you, I'm talking to you. What's your rank, huh? Master of mops, commander of trash cans." The group laughed, each chuckle sharper than the last. A nearby technician rolled her eyes but kept typing, unwilling to get in the middle of SEAL bravado. Brandon lifted his gaze slowly. Not hostile, not defensive, just calm. Almost too calm. His eyes, those quiet, fathomless eyes, met the SEAL's. "I don't have a rank," Brandon said simply. "Just a job, same as everyone else." His tone wasn't submissive. It wasn't apologetic. It was steady. And that steadiness irritated the SEAL more than anger ever could. "Oh, come on," the SEAL scoffed. "Don't pretend you're anything special. You're a janitor, a civilian contractor. You clean up after the real warriors." One of the younger SEALs murmured, "Dude, chill," but the leader ignored him. Brandon didn't take the bait. He opened his mop bucket and continued his work unfazed. To the SEAL, that felt like an insult. "You think you're too good to answer?" The leader pressed. "Or maybe you think you're one of us." A few technicians glanced up now. Even the senior comms officer looked uncomfortable. Brandon finally sighed, straightened, and leaned lightly on his mop. "If you want to make a joke, that's fine," he said softly. "But don't disrespect the uniform you wear in the process." Silence. A dangerous, stunned silence. Nobody talked back to SEALs. Nobody challenged them, especially not a janitor in a white apron. The SEAL stepped forward. "Say that again." Brandon didn't blink. Respect goes both ways. The SEAL stiffened fists, clenching, and then a voice cut through the tension like a blade. "That's enough. General Megan Drake." Her presence shifted the entire room. Everyone snapped to attention spines, straightening faster than rifle bolts. Her 4 stars glinted under the fluorescent lights, but her expression held something far more potent than authority. She wasn't just angry. She was unsettled. Her sharp gaze locked onto the scene. Brandon standing calmly with his mop, the SEAL looking like he'd just been caught stealing from the Pentagon. Petty Officer Hale Megan said coolly, "Do you find it appropriate to harass a civilian on my base?" Hale swallowed hard. "Ma'am, we were just—" "A joke," she finished. "Yes, I heard. Unfortunately for you, I don't find disrespect entertaining." She began to step forward, and for a fleeting second, Brandon noticed it, the way her eyes flickered to him again. Not just as a janitor, but as something familiar. Something she couldn't name yet. Megan stopped only a few feet from him, though her attention remained on the SEALs. "Petty Officer Hale, you and your team will report for mandatory discipline review at 1500 hours. Dismissed." The SEALs filed out chastened, but not before Hale shot Brandon a glare that promised trouble. Brandon didn't return it. He merely dipped his head in acknowledgement and returned to his work. But Megan wasn't done. When the last SEAL disappeared, she turned toward Brandon, her voice softer, no longer carrying the harsh edge of command. "Are you all right, Mr. Cross?" Brandon paused, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "You handled that well," she said. Too well, she wanted to add. No civilian should stand toe-to-toe with a trained SEAL and remain calm. But she held her tongue. "That wasn't the first time they poked at you, was it?" Brandon shrugged lightly. "People say things. Doesn't matter." But Megan felt it. The same unease that had pricked at her yesterday returned with sharp clarity. Most people cowered before SEALs. Most people avoided confrontation with elite operators. Most people didn't have that posture. Most people didn't meet her eyes with that quiet steadiness. Megan studied him, really studied him, his stance, his breathing, the subtle readiness in the way he held himself. Her heart gave an unexpected, unsteady thump. She had seen this before. In files stamped, classified. In mission reports tagged eyes only. In men who were ghosts, operators so deep in black missions they barely existed. A memory surfaced, a blurred photo, a figure half-turned, posture identical. Her fingertips tingled. "Have we met before?" Megan asked suddenly. Brandon froze, not visibly, but in the tiny way a man freezes when a door he tried so hard to close suddenly creaks open. "I don't think so, ma'am," he said. But the way he said it, too careful, too neutral, only deepened her suspicion. Before she could press further, alarms blipped on a nearby console. Technicians rushed to their stations. "General Drake, we need you," someone called. Duty pulled her away, but as she turned to leave, she cast one more glance over her shoulder at the janitor who stood like a soldier, at the quiet eyes that seemed to carry 1,000 miles of memory, at the man who she suspected for the first time was not who he claimed to be. Later that afternoon, while the base buzzed with noise and urgency, Megan found herself replaying the moment again and again. His calm, his posture, his eyes. The joke about rank still echoed in her mind, because deep down she knew it wasn't a joke at all. Not when the man being mocked looked like someone who once outranked nearly everyone in the room. Evening settled over the naval base with a strange stillness, too quiet for Hawaii, too sharp for a place that rarely slept. The hum of generators, the faint chatter of personnel, the metallic whir of servers deep in the command wing. Everything felt slightly offbeat, like a song played a half-second behind its rhythm. Brandon Cross felt it the moment he stepped into the main cyber corridor. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a smell. It wasn't even something visible. It was simply wrong. A ripple in the environment that only someone trained to survive the invisible could sense. A tilt in the atmosphere, the kind that made a former ghost operator's muscles tighten without permission. He pushed his janitor's cart forward, slow and steady, masking the instinct rising through him. Brandon had gotten good at pretending over the years, pretending he didn't notice things, pretending he didn't read rooms, like open books, pretending he didn't hear the language of danger humming beneath ordinary life. Tonight, that hum was louder. Inside the control center, technicians huddled around their screens, whispering anxiously. Rows of monitors displayed maps and telemetry, some flashing amber. An irritation in the satellite network had escalated since morning minor, enough for most personnel to dismiss, but not minor enough that high-ranking officers weren't gathering in clusters to discuss it. Brandon paused, his eyes drifting toward the biggest screen in the room. GeoSat 14 unscheduled. Drift error 3.02%. 3% wasn't catastrophic, but it wasn't natural either. He leaned on his mop a little too long, a little too knowingly. And at that exact moment, General Megan Drake stepped into the room. Her presence hit the air like a shift in gravity. Officers snapped straighter, technicians lowered their voices, and conversations folded instantly. Megan moved with the confidence of a woman who'd built her entire life around decisions no one else wanted to make. But tonight, there was something in her eyes that betrayed the calm wariness. Concern. A lingering question she couldn't shake since her interaction with Brandon that morning. She walked toward the main terminal. The technicians parted for her. "What do we have?" she asked. "Satellite drift, ma'am," the senior tech replied. "We've been trying to stabilize it for hours. The system isn't responding normally." Megan studied the data, her jaw tightening as she scanned the numbers. Then, without meaning to, her gaze drifted. To him. Brandon, pushing his cart quietly in the far corner. As if he belonged there, as if he didn't. Something about the synchronized tension between his brows, the angle of his head, as he scanned the monitors from across the room. It hit her again. That creeping certainty. She knew that posture. She had seen it in field briefing photos and classified after-action reports, men who worked on missions that didn't officially exist. Ghost operators, shadows with heartbeat signatures, people who weren't supposed to be alive. A technician tried inputting a series of commands. The system refused the override. "Try manual synchronization," Megan ordered. "We did, ma'am. 3 times. She exhaled sharply. Everything was too slow, too sloppy, too loud. She needed it fixed now. And then before she even realized why her eyes snapped back to Brandon. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't looking at his mop either. He was looking at the terminal screen with the kind of focus only a trained operator could have, just for a second, but long enough for her chest to tighten. He wasn't curious. He was analyzing. Megan's breath caught. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She only watched. And in the next beat, something happened so quietly. Only she caught it, the senior technician muttered. "Maybe if I shift the primary bus, we've already done that," another replied. Then a faint beep, a subtle flicker on the secondary satellite window. "Wait. What was that?" the technician whispered. The keyboard lights blinked in a pattern that made 0 sense until Brandon took 2 steps forward. He didn't speak. He didn't ask. He simply knelt, opened his janitor's cart, and pulled out a small multi-tool screwdriver. "Sir," a technician started, but Brandon wasn't listening to them. He unscrewed a panel from the side of the workstation, something no janitor should know existed, and flipped a tiny emergency switch hidden behind the casing. The screen stabilized instantly. GeoSat 14 corrected itself. All amber alerts blinked green. Technicians froze. Megan froze. Brandon stood wiping his hands calmly on his apron. "That switch gets stuck sometimes," he said softly. "Humidity from the bay air can cause the bypass circuit to misread input commands." He started pushing his cart again. Every eye in the room followed him, and Megan Drake's heart slammed against her ribs. Because that switch wasn't labeled. It wasn't in the public schematics. Only 3 people on base knew its function, and all of them had top clearance badges. How did he know she found herself stepping toward him before she realized her feet were moving? "Mr. Cross," she called out. He paused. The technicians pretended to work, but their ears strained toward the exchange. Megan's voice dropped into something quieter, something edged with disbelief. "That switch isn't documented." He met her gaze evenly. "Yes, ma'am. You shouldn't know it exists." "No, ma'am." Then how lucky guess, he offered with a faint smile. It wasn't a joke, not truly. It was a shield. Megan felt it, and it infuriated her that she felt it. He nodded respectfully and pushed the cart out, leaving behind a room full of people who knew they had witnessed something impossible. Outside the base, lights cast long shadows across the pavement. Brandon moved through them like someone who belonged to the darkness more than the light. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel Megan's gaze chasing him all the way down the hallway. Because a man who could fix a military satellite failure in seconds was not a janitor. And Megan Drake, 4-star general hardened by duty, had finally smelled the truth. the same way he had smelled danger. Something in this base had shifted. Something deep. Something old. Something waking up. And as Brandon pushed his cart into the dim maintenance corridor, he exhaled slowly, whispering to himself. It's starting. Night fell over the naval base like a heavy curtain, too fast, too quiet, too deliberate. The air tasted of salt and distant storms, and somewhere in the far reaches of the Pacific, thunder rolled like a warning. Brandon Cross felt it before the first rumble reached land. Something was coming. He had sensed it all day. Now it was here. He finished wiping down the last stainless steel railing in the cyber wing, the silence pressing in on him. He set his cloth aside, and that's when he heard the footsteps. Heavy, coordinated, predatory. Not the easy stride of routine patrol. This was a formation. 6 SEAL operators turned the corner at the same time, boots striking the ground in perfect rhythm. At the front was Petty Officer Hale, the same man who had mocked Brandon earlier that morning. His eyes held no humor now. Brandon Cross Hale barked. Step away from the railing. Brandon placed his cleaning rag into the cart without rushing. Can I help you? Son Hale's jaw ticked. You can start by telling me what the hell you were doing in the secure panel behind Console 7 today. Brandon didn't blink. Cleaning the dust. That's funny, Hale shot back. Because Command found the panel open, and the system logs show an unauthorized manual override at the exact time you were there. The 4 SEALs behind him shifted their weight, not aggressively, but preparing. Brandon could have run. He could have fought. He could have vanished into the shadows as he once had. But doing any of those things would put Sophie in danger. And he had promised himself, promised his daughter, that his past would never come for her. So he simply said, You have the wrong man. Hale smirked. We'll let the general decide that. Cuff him. 2 SEALs moved in. Their grips were iron rougher than procedure required. Brandon didn't resist. He allowed the cold cuffs to click around his wrists. For a moment the corridor seemed to shrink, the walls pulsing with old ghosts. He had been cuffed before, once by enemies, once by allies, once by men who pretended to be allies. But never as a janitor, never as a father, trying to live a second life. 1 SEAL shoved him forward. Walk. Brandon did. Just down the hall, General Megan Drake was finishing a briefing when the echo of boots caught her ear. Precise. Sharp. Not routine. She turned instinctively toward the glass window lining her office. The sight struck her like a blow. Brandon. The quiet janitor. The man who moved like a question she couldn't answer was being dragged down the corridor in handcuffs. Her breath caught a jolt of alarm firing straight through her chest. What the? She whispered, already striding out of her office. She emerged into the hall just as the SEALs were passing. Halt, Megan commanded. The formation froze instantly. Petty Officer Hale snapped to attention. General Drake, ma'am. Her eyes went straight to Brandon. His head was lowered, but when he lifted it, she saw something she had never seen in him before. Not fear. Not anger. Sadness. Old sadness. Buried grief. Something inside her tightened painfully. She turned on Hale. Explain. Now, ma'am, this civilian accessed restricted systems and interfered with satellite operations. We have grounds for detainment under Section 14 of the National Cybersecurity Protection Act. That's a heavy claim, Megan said coldly. Where is your evidence? Hale gestured toward Brandon. System logs, ma'am. And he was found at the panel during the exact window of override. Megan narrowed her eyes. They flicked between Hale and Brandon. Brandon held her gaze steady as ever. General, he said quietly, I didn't do anything wrong. The calmness in his voice hit her harder than any shouting could have. It didn't sound like the plea of an innocent man. It sounded like the truth of someone who hadn't spoken his real truth in years. But procedure was procedure. Even she couldn't interfere without cause. "Hale," she said, "voice stone, you will hold him in cell 3. No interrogation without my authorization." "Yes, ma'am." "And do not mistreat him," she added more sharply than intended. Hale stiffened, surprised. "Ma'am, he's a janitor." "No," Megan murmured under her breath. "He's something else." She didn't realize she had spoken aloud. The SEALs escorted Brandon away. Megan remained in the corridor long after their footsteps faded. Cell 3 was cold. Too cold. Designed for psychological pressure rather than comfort. Brandon sat on the metal bench cuff, still biting into his wrists. The hum of the fluorescent lights above felt like needles in his skull. Ghost protocol. He hadn't heard that term in years. He prayed it stayed buried. But deep down, he knew praying wouldn't help. Not tonight. Outside, Sophie Cross sat on a folding chair near the security office, hugging her knees to her chest. Her eyes were puffy from crying cheeks, streaked with tears. Mrs. Kealoha had both arms wrapped around her, trying to soothe her. But Sophie didn't want soothing. She wanted her father. "Where's Daddy?" she whispered between sobs. "Why won't they let me see him?" Megan Drake walked toward them, and the moment she saw Sophie, something inside her cracked. The little girl's trembling voice wasn't just sad, it was terrified. A memory flashed in Megan's mind herself at age 8, waiting outside a hospital room while doctors worked on her father after a mission gone wrong. She swallowed hard. Mrs. Kealoha stood. "General Drake," she said formally, though her voice wavered. Megan gently knelt in front of Sophie, lowering herself until they were eye level. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "your daddy is safe. I promise you that." Sophie sniffed. He didn't do anything bad. And in that moment, Megan believed her. Not because of evidence, not because of protocol, but because of the way Brandon had looked at her, the way he had looked at Sophie, the way he had stood under those fluorescent lights, not defiant, not guilty, but resigned, as if he had worn handcuffs before, as if he expected them to return someday. Something deep in Megan's chest whispered, "Find the truth before someone else does." Hours later, long after Sophie had fallen asleep in exhaustion, and the bass quieted enough for Megan to hear her own heartbeat, she stood in the dim hallway of the detention wing. She looked through the glass window of cell 3. Brandon sat alone, his head bowed, his hands cuffed. But his posture, even in defeat, even in the cold, sterile room, he sat straight, balanced, controlled, like a soldier waiting for orders, like a ghost waiting to be called back to life. The sight made Megan's throat tighten. She pressed her palm lightly to the glass. "Who are you, Brandon Cross?" she whispered. "And what the hell have we just triggered?" He didn't hear her. But somewhere inside that quiet man, a storm was waking. And the base had no idea what was coming. The storm rolled in just after midnight, low, heavy clouds dragging across the Hawaiian sky like bruises spreading over the horizon. The air thickened, charged with electricity, and even the seagulls went silent. It was the kind of night when old instincts crawled out of their graves. And inside cell 3, Brandon Cross opened his eyes, not because of the thunder, not because of the flickering light above him, because something deep and familiar had shifted in the base. A pulse, a tremor, a disturbance only someone who had lived in the classified world would recognize. He sat up slowly, the cuffs cold against his wrists. Outside the cell, alarms had not yet sounded. Footsteps had not yet thundered down the corridor. But Brandon knew it was coming. It always came in waves. Silence, then chaos. Tonight the silence was breaking. Across the base in the command center, technicians hunched over their screens, when the first digital tremor hit. A soft ping, barely audible, barely noticeable. The youngest technician frowned. Sir. We're getting an odd signal from the Pentagon uplink. What kind of signal? The supervisor asked. Another ping. Then the screen flashed red. Priority, Omega Alert Ghost Protocol activated, missing check-in Commander B. Cross, status unknown. Every head in the room froze. The supervisor's face drained of color. That can't be right. Ghost Protocol hasn't been active in 7 years, another whispered. Since the crash in Kandahar, a stunned murmur rippled across the room. Ghost Protocol was not a routine alert. Ghost Protocol was not a drill. Ghost Protocol was for one thing only. When a Black Ops commander listed as KIA buried in a sealed file failed to make a classified security check-in, known only to the highest levels of government. And the system was saying Commander Brandon Cross had missed his check-in, which was impossible. He was dead, documented, buried, gone. Yet the system didn't malfunction. It never malfunctioned. Someone whispered, "If Ghost Protocol is active, that means he's alive." The alarms blared before the shock could settle. Red light spun through the command center. Sirens wailed. Steel doors sealed. The base plunged into lockdown. General Megan Drake was asleep for less than an hour when the emergency klaxons ripped her awake. She shot up, heart-pounding, snatching her uniform jacket from the chair. The comm device on her bedside table buzzed violently. "General Drake, this is Central Command. We have a situation." What level? Megan demanded. A beat of terrified silence. Then, "Level 0, ma'am." Megan froze. "Say that again." "Ghost Protocol has been activated." Her blood ran cold. Ghost Protocol. The one alert she had hoped never to encounter in her lifetime. The one tied to operations so deep that even she, as a 4-star general, could only access fragments. She rushed into the hallway, boots half-zipped, heart slamming. "Patch it through to my mobile," she ordered. The data hit her screen instantly, and when she saw the name, she stumbled. Missing check-in Commander Brandon Cross. Her breath left her. Commander. Cross. Brandon Cross. "No," she whispered, gripping the wall for balance. "That has to be a mistake." But the system never made mistakes. Not with Ghost Protocol. Her mind raced. The way he stood, the way he analyzed danger, the way he touched the satellite panel without hesitation, the way he didn't fear the SEALs, the way the technician's screen stabilized the moment he intervened. Pieces slammed together like a puzzle solved too late. The janitor wasn't a janitor. He wasn't a civilian. He wasn't ordinary. He was a ghost. A commander of ghosts. Someone the Pentagon still tracked even after the world believed him dead. She swallowed hard, 1,000 emotions crashing through her chest. Shock, anger, fear, and something deeper. He never told me. Cell 3 shook as the heavy steel doors sealed across the detention corridor. Lights flickered to emergency red. Brandon closed his eyes with a quiet exhale. "So it's time," he murmured. A guard rushed to the cell window, panic in his voice. "What's happening? Why are we in lockdown?" Brandon didn't answer. The guard stepped closer. "You know something, don't you?" Still no reply, because at that moment, for the first time since he set foot back on American soil, Brandon felt the old world reaching for him. Ghost Protocol. The tether he could never escape. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Multiple teams, heavy boots, high clearance. The guard turned pale. "Are they coming for you?" Brandon finally opened his eyes. "They're not coming," he said quietly. "They're already here." Meanwhile, in the security lobby, Sophie Cross jolted awake from where Mrs. Kealoha had tucked her onto a padded bench. Her little fists rubbed her eyes as the sirens blared overhead. "Where's Daddy?" she cried out. panicked. "Mrs. Kealoha!" "What's happening?" Before the woman could answer the hallway, lights went out, then snapped to red. Sophie's heart raced. She felt it in her bones. Something was very, very wrong. A soldier rushed past them. Megan Drake emerged from the elevator at that exact moment, still fastening her jacket, eyes blazing with fear and determination. She spotted Sophie immediately. The child ran to her without hesitation, something she'd never done before, throwing her arms around Megan's waist. "General Drake," Sophie sobbed. "Please help Daddy." Megan knelt, hands on Sophie's shoulders, and this time, she didn't offer comforting lies. She offered truth. "I'm going to him right now," Megan breathed. "I swear to you I won't let anything happen to your father." Sophie's trembling hand clung to her sleeve. "Don't let them take him away," she whispered. Those small, desperate words carved straight through Megan's armor. No soldier, no enemy, no superior had ever broken through her walls the way this little girl just did. Megan stood. Her eyes hardened. Her voice became steel. "Get me to cell 3, she commanded the nearest officer. Now, down in the detention block, Brandon stood as the reinforced door slid open, revealing a team of high-ranking officers and Pentagon liaisons rushing down the hallway. And behind them, a thunderous roar of rotors slicing through the night. Helicopters. Not one, not two. 5. Touching down on the tarmac. Brandon closed his eyes. He already knew who was inside, and he already knew what this meant for his life, for his daughter, for the fragile peace he had tried so hard to build. Ghosts never stayed buried. Not forever. The storm over the base had become a living thing, growling, pulsing, bearing down on Pearl Harbor, with a ferocity that mirrored the tension inside the command wing. Rain hammered against the steel rooftops. Lightning flashed like camera shutters across a battlefield, and the entire installation felt as if it were holding its breath. Then the first helicopter cut through the sky, a deafening roar, then another, and another. 5 military aircraft descended in perfect formation. Black unmarked their rotors, slicing through the storm, with the precision of machines built for missions that didn't officially exist. Every soldier on the night shift froze. Every technician looked up. Every alarm, every flashing light, every heartbeat seemed to sync to the thunder of approaching blades. Someone near the control tower whispered, Those are command hawks. They only deploy for 4-star generals." He was wrong. Tonight, they carried 5. In the detention block, Brandon Cross stood silently as the ground vibrated beneath him. The footsteps of approaching officers echoed louder and louder. Down the corridor, 6 men in front, dozens of armed guards behind. And at the very end of the hall, Megan Drake emerged, her uniform, rain splattered from the sprint across the tarmac. Her hair clung slightly to her cheek. Her chest rose and fell with urgency, but her focus was razor sharp, locked on only one thing. "Hint, open cell 3, she ordered. 2 security officers hesitated. "Ma'am, protocol says that was before they landed," she cut sharply. "Open. This. Cell." The steel door hissed aside. Brandon lifted his head. Megan stepped in, her gaze sweeping over the cuffs, the cold bench, the exhaustion in his eyes. Her heart clenched in a way she couldn't control. "What's happening?" she demanded. "Who are they here for?" Brandon's voice was calm. Too calm. For me. Megan felt her stomach drop. Footsteps thundered. The officers escorting the Pentagon liaisons stepped aside as 5 towering silhouettes entered the detention wing. The entire room froze. 5 men, each wearing the 4 gleaming stars of the highest rank in the U.S. military, strode forward. Their presence sucked the air out of the hall. Their expressions were grim, stone-like, heavy with knowledge that few people on Earth carried. General Thornton, General Ramirez, Admiral Harlow, General Whitaker, and at the center, General Marcus Ellery, Chief of Joint Special Operations. They didn't acknowledge the guards. They didn't acknowledge the other officers. Their eyes were fixed on one man, Brandon Cross. General Ellery stopped in front of the open cell, his jaw clenched in a way Megan had never seen. He looked at Brandon not like a prisoner, but like a ghost. There was silence, long, crushing, historic. Then Ellery spoke, voice low, reverent, shaking slightly. "Commander Brandon Cross." Megan's breath hitched. Commander. Not janitor. Not civilian. Commander. After 7 years of silence, Ellery continued, "It's time for you to come home." The words hit the corridor like a hurricane. Every guard stiffened. Every officer stared in disbelief. Even Megan, composed, disciplined, unshakable, found her legs weakening. Her voice barely escaped her lips. "Commander." Brandon stepped out of the cell, the chains clinking with each controlled movement. His face didn't show fear or relief, only acceptance. A resignation forged in covert war, buried missions, and a life he could never walk away from. General Ramirez removed his cap, rainwater dripping from the brim. "You were never supposed to return this way, son." General Whitaker barked orders. "Unlock his cuffs." Now. The guards scrambled, fumbling to obey. The cuffs fell open with a metallic clatter, and the moment they hit the floor, the 5 generals straightened as one. Then it happened. A moment that would be whispered about across the base for decades. All 5 4-star generals stepped back and saluted Brandon Cross. A full formal military salute directed at a man who had spent months mopping floors in silence. The guards couldn't breathe. The officers couldn't think. Even Megan felt tears sting her eyes. Brandon held their salute for 3 seconds, eyes steady posture, perfect, until General Ellery lowered his hand. Ellery exhaled shakily. "We apologize for the detainment. You were flagged as a civilian, but the Ghost Protocol override confirmed your identity." One of the officers behind Megan whispered, terrified. "Ghost Protocol." "Was real," General Harlow answered without turning. "Real, classified, and above your clearance." Megan found her voice again, quiet, strained. Why was he registered as deceased? General Ellery finally looked at her. "Ma'am, Commander Cross led the Ghost Unit, the deepest Black Ops team in U.S. history. After a betrayal inside our own command structure, the unit was wiped out. We marked him KIA to protect him while he hunted the traitor." He paused. "But we haven't heard from him in 7 years." Megan swallowed hard. "So the missing check-in figured a full-force recovery," Ellery finished. "It means something or someone has forced him out of hiding." He turned to Brandon. "What happened, son?" Brandon's eyes held old storms, old ghosts. "I came back," he said quietly, "because the man who betrayed my unit, he's here." A collective shiver rippled through the corridor. Megan's heart slammed violently. Betrayal. Inside the military. Ghost unit wiped out. Brandon surviving in the shadows. She had suspected he was more. She had not imagined this. Ellery nodded gravely. "Then we move now. We'll brief the generals in the command room." Brandon turned slowly, almost reluctantly toward Megan. Their eyes met, and in that one look, Megan understood everything. The sadness in his posture, the calmness in the face of danger, the way he had helped without boasting, the way Sophie clung to him like he was her entire world. He hadn't been hiding from danger. He had been hiding danger from the world. She stepped toward him, her voice low, trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" Brandon held her gaze, soft, pained, honest. "Because the moment I told you, he whispered your life would never be the same." Before she could answer, the generals escorted him down the hall. Brandon Cross, commander of Ghosts, walked away with the weight of a resurrected past settling onto his shoulders. And Megan Drake stood rooted in place, knowing with absolute certainty that nothing, not for the base, not for the country, not for her, would ever be the same again. Rain sheeted across the base as the 5 four-star generals escorted Brandon Cross through the fortified hallway, leading to the Deep Operations Briefing Chamber, an underground room reserved only for the most classified military secrets. The storm outside paled compared to the one that now swirled inside the base's command structure. General Megan Drake followed close behind her heartbeat, racing with a mixture of disbelief, dread, and something she wasn't ready to name. She had spent her life commanding wars, coordinating fleets, making decisions that changed the course of nations. Yet nothing had ever shaken her the way Brandon Cross had in the last 3 hours. A janitor, a ghost, a commander, a dead man walking. Her breath trembled as she entered the briefing room, the hum of security locks sealing behind her. The 5 generals formed a half circle. Brandon stood at the center. Megan hovered at the edge of the room, technically outranked, but invited by Ellery himself, who glanced at her before beginning. She needs to hear this, he had said. She should have heard it years ago. Now she understood why. General Ellery stepped forward, shoulders, heavy eyes weary. "Let's begin," he said. "It's time to tell the full truth." The screen flickered to life, revealing a classified emblem Megan hadn't seen in years, one she'd once believed was military folklore. Ghost Unit, Black Ops Deep, Recon Troas Zero Trace Status Decommissioned Total Loss. Megan inhaled sharply. She'd read whispers about Ghost Unit operators so elite they weren't recorded in any database, men and women who executed missions too dangerous, too politically volatile, too morally gray for official channels. Their leader had been a name always redacted, a shadow among shadows. That shadow now stood a few feet from her. General Ramirez cleared his throat. Commander Cross led the Ghost Unit for 11 years. Covert extractions, foreign deep infiltration, counter-disinformation sweeps, internal traitor suppression, all without ever leaving a trace. He gave Brandon a long, painful look. They were the best this nation ever had. Megan's heart twisted. General Harlow stepped forward. 7 years ago, Ghost Unit received intel about a mole inside U.S. command structure. Someone with high clearance was feeding classified movement details to a hostile power. We initiated Operation Silence Fall. General Ellery continued. A trap mission. A decoy extraction intended to expose the mole. His voice darkened. But someone inside the Pentagon betrayed the entire operation. The Ghost Unit was ambushed. The screen changed. Static. Then grainy battlefield footage. Black smoke, burning vehicles. Bodies sprawled across sand. Megan's breath caught. Ramirez continued, voice heavy. 22 operators died within minutes. Only one made it out alive. Her gaze snapped to Brandon. He didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't blink. Only his jaw tightened. Ellery finished the sentence no one else dared to speak. The survivor was Commander Brandon Cross. Silence fell like a final judgment. General Whitaker spoke next. To protect the integrity of the investigation and Brandon's life, we staged his death, declared him KIA, buried a coffin filled with sandbags. His daughter was given a civilian identity. His wife. Brandon's eyes darkened, old pain flickering like lightning. Megan felt her heart twist. "What happened to your wife?" she asked softly. Brandon exhaled a breath that sounded like a wound reopening. "She died in the collision during the setup. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong life to be married to a ghost." His voice cracked not much, but enough for Megan to feel the weight of years he had carried alone. Sophie, Megan thought, an 8-year-old child, raised by a man living under an identity built to protect them both. General Ellery continued. "Since then, Cross has operated off-grid tracking leads, identifying patterns, and watching for the mole who murdered his team. Megan frowned. But why come back now? Why appear on the base? Brandon looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time in minutes. Because the mole resurfaced here. A cold chill swept through the room. Here, on this base, Megan asked. Brandon nodded grimly. The Ghost Unit traitor used a signature I recognized. A data fingerprint buried in the satellite interference. That's why the system drifted. He was testing something. Sending a signal. Megan felt her pulse quicken. Brandon continued. Ghost protocol automatically activated. Because my internal failsafe check-in was tampered with the same way, it was the night my team was killed. Larry stepped closer. And when the system detected his identity mismatch, it alerted the highest level, the 5 of us. So the traitor knows you're alive, Megan whispered. Brandon's silence was the answer. Megan inhaled sharply, her voice trembling. And Ghost Unit. All of them. They died because of a leak inside our own house. Ramirez nodded. The worst kind of betrayal. General Harlow added, We've spent 7 years trying to find him. But Brandon has actually been getting close. Brandon's eyes lowered, close enough that he would try to eliminate me again. The room's temperature dropped. The rain outside hammered like fists along the roof. Megan stared at him. Really stared. The janitor who fixed satellite panels. The father who packed lunch for his daughter. The man who cleaned corridors at dawn and dusk. The man who carried grief like a second heartbeat. A ghost living in plain sight. Her voice trembled. And all this time, you've been alone. Brandon met her gaze with a depth that nearly broke her. I had to be, until I finished it. But now Megan asked. Now Brandon said quietly, They know where I am, and that means Sophie is in danger. The generals exchanged grim looks. General Ellery placed a hand on Brandon's shoulder. Son, you're not alone anymore. We're going to finish this together. Megan felt a tear burn in her chest, but she blinked it away. There was no room for emotion. Not yet. Not when a traitor walked among them. Not when she finally understood the truth. Brandon Cross wasn't just a man with quiet eyes. He was a man who had lived in hell, and hell had just followed him home. The briefing room emptied slowly, generals scattering into separate war councils, intelligence teams rushing to secure networks and security divisions, locking down every inch of the base. The storm outside thundered like cannon fire, shaking the reinforced walls. But inside the room, only 2 figures remained. Brandon Cross and General Megan Drake. For a long moment, neither spoke. Brandon sat at the edge of the table, head lowered, fingers loosely intertwined. He looked like a man who had survived too much, buried too much, and carried too much to ever truly rest. Megan stood several feet away, frozen between duty and something far more human. She had commanded fleets face down, admirals twice her age, testified before Pentagon panels. Without flinching, yet nothing had prepared her for the weight in her chest as she stared at the man she once believed was just a quiet janitor. How long have you been carrying this? She finally asked. Brandon exhaled slowly. Weary. Too long. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Not as a 4-star general, not as a superior officer, as someone who wanted no needed to understand him. You didn't speak during the briefing, Megan said softly. Not really. You spoke facts, but not your pain. Brandon's eyes flickered a storm behind them. Megan, pain doesn't help anyone. It would help me understand you, she whispered. He looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time, he didn't hide behind the stoic mask. His voice dropped to a quiet, hollow tone. Understanding me won't make your life easier. She leaned forward. Maybe I don't want easier. Maybe I want the truth." Brandon swallowed hard. "The truth," he said, "is that the moment I tell you my story, you become part of it." There, it was, the warning. The line she could either cross or walk away from. She didn't move. Brandon's shoulders slumped. He stared at his hands, the same hands once trained to dismantle bombs, break locks, load weapons in total darkness. The Ghost Unit wasn't just a team he began. We were a family. Brothers. Sisters. People who trusted each other with their last heartbeat. His voice tightened. And they all died, because of a mistake I didn't see coming. Megan's breath caught. "Brandon." "No, that wasn't your fault." His expression didn't soften. "Isn't it? I was the commander. Their lives were my responsibility." He looked away, jaw clenched. "I replay it every night. Every detail. Every scream. Every face. Lightning cracked outside, sharp, violent. Megan whispered, 'What happened to you?' Would have destroyed anyone." Brandon shook his head. "It didn't destroy me. Not fully. That would have been mercy." His voice dropped lower. "Instead, it turned me into someone who lived only for revenge, for answers, for a ghost of justice." Megan's chest tightened so fiercely she had to breathe slowly to steady it. "And Sophie?" she asked gently. For the first time, softness touched Brandon's face. "Sophie saved me," he said. "After her mother died, I was ready to disappear. Take the staged death for real. Leave this country. Leave everything." A tear slipped from Megan's lashes before she could stop it. "What stopped you?" Brandon looked up with eyes full of quiet heartbreak. A little girl who still believed her father wasn't a monster. Megan pressed her hand to her mouth, trembling. When she looked at me, Brandon continued, voice shaking. I realized I couldn't disappear. Not until I made the world safe enough for her to grow up without shadows on her doorstep. He inhaled sharply. "So I became a janitor. I swept floors, fixed pipes, checked on her homework. I built a life out of silence." Megan's heart squeezed painfully. "You built a life out of love." His lips parted, surprised by her clarity. "Don't diminish what you've done," Megan said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "Hiding your identity wasn't weakness. It was strength. You protected your daughter the only way you knew how." He looked away, eyes stinging. "Megan, I didn't want you involved. You didn't choose that," she whispered. "Fate did." There was a long, aching silence. Then Megan stood, moved around the table and sat beside him, closer than she should, closer than protocol allowed. "You're not alone anymore," she said gently. "Not in this fight. Not in this pain." Brandon turned his face toward her, and for the first time the stoic facade cracked barely, but enough for her to see the exhaustion underneath. "Megan," he murmured, voice raw. "I can't let you get close to this." She reached out, placing her hand over his. "You don't get to decide that for me." Brandon's breath caught her touch, hit like lightning through his entire body. Gentle. Steady. Real. "You and Sophie," Megan whispered. "You've both been living in survival mode for too long." He closed his eyes. "My life isn't safe," he murmured. "My world is blood and shadows." And yet she whispered, "You've spent every day making sure Sophie sees light instead." Brandon swallowed hard. She deserves better than the life I had." Maybe Megan breathed, squeezing his hand. "She deserves exactly the father she has." His throat tightened, emotions colliding inside him. He tried to pull his hand away. She held it firmly. "Megan, this can't happen," he whispered. She leaned closer, her voice low, intimate. "I'm not asking for something to happen," she said. "I'm asking you to let me be here. With you. Beside you. Not as a general. not as a superior. Her voice softened to a whisper. As Megan. Brandon opened his eyes, staring into hers, eyes filled with sincerity, strength, and an emotion she had locked away for far too long. Rain hammered the roof above them. The storm raged outside. Inside, something gentler began to form. Not romance, not yet. Something quieter, a connection, a fragile bridge between two wounded souls. And yet both felt the weight of the world on that single moment. The traitor was still out there. The danger was rising, and the quiet tenderness between them would soon be tested in ways neither could imagine. But for now, in that small room, lit only by stormlight, Brandon Cross, the man who never spoke of pain, finally let someone share a piece of it. And Megan Drake, a general who had spent her life alone in command, finally let someone in. The storm did not ease by morning. It thickened, dark clouds pressing low over Pearl Harbor, the wind carving sharp whistles through metal beams. The entire naval base seemed to hold itself tighter, as if bracing for something invisible yet imminent. Inside, the Command Operations Center urgency pulsed like electricity. Technicians worked with stiff shoulders. Marines patrolled with hands closer to their weapons. Officers murmured in clipped tones. Something was wrong. Everyone felt it. But only Brandon Cross knew just how wrong it was. He stood in front of a long table strewn with classified documents, photos, encrypted logs, and fragments of evidence he had spent 7 years collecting. Megan Drake stood beside him, arms crossed, not in defiance, but in focus, in determination. She was no longer just a general evaluating a case. She was an ally, a partner in the hunt. The 5 four-star generals watched silently from the other side of the table. No one dared speak first, not until Brandon did. At last, he tapped a finger on a set of images, his voice low but commanding. This is where everything began. The top photo showed a night vision capture of a convoy halted in the desert engines, smoking bodies sprawled. It was the final image of the ghost unit before the ambush. Megan inhaled sharply. She had seen battlefield tragedy before, but never like this. Not planned, not orchestrated, not betrayal written in every angle. Brandon pointed to a timestamp on the corner. That night at 2300 hours, we received a last-minute route change, supposedly from Central Command. General Ellery nodded grimly. We verified years ago that the message was forged, Brandon continued. The forged route led us directly into a kill zone. Whoever sent it had access to top-tier encryption and knew Ghost Unit's protocols intimately. Megan's jaw tightened. Meaning, a senior officer. Yes, Brandon said. Someone with clearance above even special operations. Someone who knew how we moved. Someone from inside. He slid another document forward. A declassified snippet showing a communication request from the night of the ambush, originating from a highly restricted internal channel. Megan frowned. That channel? Only a handful of people can access it. Brandon's eyes lifted. Pain, conviction, resolve. I chased this signal for years. Every time I got close, the trail vanished. Someone covered their tracks so well even Pentagon analysts couldn't find residue. General Ramirez leaned forward. But you did. Brandon nodded once. He pulled forward a final set of data, a series of satellite anomalies, message pings, and internal base logs that only a man like him could interpret. Megan scanned it, and her stomach twisted. These patterns, she whispered. They match the ones from 7 years ago. Brandon's voice dropped to a chilling calm. He's using the same method, same pattern, same signature. General Whitaker slammed a hand on the table. So the mole is active again, on this base. Brandon nodded. A cold wave rippled through the room. Megan stepped closer to him, her voice steady, her eyes furious. Who is it? Brandon hesitated. This was the moment. The truth he had carried alone. The truth that had hunted him, haunted him, nearly killed him. Slowly he opened a folder, one he had never shared with anyone, and turned it toward Megan. "It's someone you know," he said. "Someone with power. Someone trusted." The name at the top made Megan's entire body go still. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "No," she whispered. "It can't be him." Brandon held her gaze. I didn't want to believe it either. General Ellery stepped closer. "Who is it?" Megan swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "Deputy Commander Sloan." The room erupted. General Harlow cursed under his breath. Whitaker muttered, "That snake." Ramirez slammed a fist into the table. Deputy Commander Adrian Sloan, the man second in command of Pacific Intelligence, the man Megan herself had mentored years ago, the man adored by High Command, respected by admirals, trusted by thousands. Megan felt her chest constrict. Sloan was with me during the Kandahar briefing. He had access to the Ghost Unit logistics. Brandon placed a gentle hand on her forearm. "You are not responsible for what he became." The touch was brief but grounding, human, steady, exactly what she needed. She steadied her breath. "What's his motive?" she asked. Brandon's voice hardened. "Money. Power. Influence. He's been feeding intel to a hostile state for over a decade. When Ghost Unit got close, he eliminated us." Megan closed her eyes in anguish. General Ellery clenched his jaw. "We take him down now. Tonight." But Brandon shook his head. "If you move too soon, he'll vanish. He's survived 7 years because he's 3 steps ahead of protocol," Whitaker growled. "Then what's your plan?" Commander Brandon looked at Megan. Only at her. "He wants one thing more than power," Brandon said softly. "He wants to finish what he started, and he knows I'm alive now. He'll come for me." Megan's pulse spiked. "You're proposing to use yourself as bait?" Brandon nodded. "It's the only way." "No." Megan stepped forward, voice firm. "Absolutely not. We'll find another way." Brandon's expression softened but did not yield. "You saw Sophie last night," he said quietly. "You held her while she cried. I've kept her safe for 7 years. But if I don't end this now, he'll keep coming. He'll find her. He'll find me." His voice cracked. "I can't let her grow up in fear, Megan." A sharp ache ran through her chest. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered. He looked at her. Really looked, his eyes gentler than she had ever seen. "I know," he murmured, "because I finally have someone who sees me." The air between them tightened. Charged. Human. Real. But before Megan could speak, alarms shrieked again across the command room. Urgent, piercing, unmistakable. A junior officer burst in. "General Drake, Commander Cross." Deputy Commander Sloan just left the base. He bypassed security. We traced the route he's heading straight toward the abandoned hangar outside the ridge. Brandon's expression turned to steel. Megan stepped forward. "He's running." The officer shook his head, terrified. "No, ma'am." He wasn't fleeing. Brandon's heartbeat stopped. He was smiling. Megan's breath chilled. The officer finished in a trembling whisper. He said one thing to the gate guard. "Tell the janitor I'm ready for him." Brandon closed his eyes. The endgame had begun. The abandoned hangar sat on the farthest edge of the base, an empty metal skeleton left over from World War II, half swallowed by vines and the relentless Hawaiian wind. Most personnel didn't even know it existed. Those who did avoided it. Something about the place felt haunted. Tonight it was. Storm clouds twisted overhead as Brandon Cross stepped out of the armored transport. The moment his boots touched the wet pavement, he felt that old instinct coil through him, the instinct trained into his bones long before he ever became a ghost. Across the tarmac, General Megan Drake climbed down from the vehicle behind him, fury and fear battling in her eyes. The 5 four-star generals followed, each wearing expressions as grim as a battlefield eulogy. A team of elite Marines formed a protective perimeter, weapons drawn scanning every shadow. But Brandon barely noticed them. His focus narrowed to the yawning mouth of the hangar, the place where Sloan waited, the place where his past would either end or begin again. Megan approached him, rain streaking her uniform. "Brandon, listen to me." "No," he said softly. "Listen to me. You should stay back." Her eyes flashed. "Absolutely not." Brandon exhaled the storm wind tugging at his sleeves. "If something happens to you," Megan stepped closer, her voice trembling. "If something happens to you, Sophie loses the only parent she has left." Her words landed like a knife. Brandon swallowed, unable to hide the emotion tightening his throat. "I won't leave her?" "Then don't walk into this alone." Before he could answer, General Ellery joined them, his voice low and grave. "This is your operation, son. But understand, if Sloan is armed, we move in." Brandon shook his head. "He wants me alive. He wants to talk before he kills me." Megan's breath caught. "How do you know that?" "Because he always talks first." Inside the hangar, silence hung like a noose. Brandon stepped through the massive doors, footsteps echoing across concrete that smelled of rust and old ghosts. His muscles tightened with every slow step. He could feel Sloan long before he saw him, like a cold shadow slithering across his skin. A single figure stood near the center, back-turned hands clasped behind him. Brandon's heart thudded. Deputy Commander Adrian Sloan, his once dark hair now flecked with gray posture, relaxed, as if greeting an old friend rather than facing the man he tried to kill. Sloan didn't turn around. 7 years, he said, voice smooth, almost amused. "I honestly didn't think you'd survive." Brandon stepped closer, fists clenched. "You should have made sure." Sloan chuckled softly, turning to face him, eyes cold, calculating. The eyes of a man who believed himself untouchable. "You always were hard to kill," Sloan said. Ghost Commander Cross, the military's favorite myth. And now, a janitor. He smirked. How poetic. Brandon didn't rise to the bait. "Why now, Sloan? Why reveal yourself?" Sloan spread his hands innocently. "Because the game is nearly over. I thought it would be charming to finish it personally." Brandon's jaw tightened. "You murdered my team." "Correction," Sloan said. "I eliminated a threat to national leverage. The Ghost unit operated outside the lines. Too loyal? Too competent? Too hard to control." He shrugged. "I did what had to be done." Emotion trembled through Brandon's voice. "They trusted you." Sloan smiled. That was their mistake. Before Brandon could move, Sloan pulled out a small detonator medal glinting beneath the hangar lights. Brandon froze. Outside, Megan's voice cracked through the comms. "Brandon, move. He has explosives." Sloan chuckled. "Oh yes, General Drake. I know you're listening." He lifted the detonator higher. "One press of this and this entire hangar goes up, including your ghost." Brandon took a slow step forward. Sloan's thumb hovered over the trigger. "That's far enough," Sloan warned. Then lightning flashed. A shot rang out, and Sloan jerked as a Marine sniper round tore the detonator from his hand, sending it skidding across the concrete. Sloan spun in fury. "You idiots!" Brandon was already moving. He lunged forward with a speed no janitor should possess. A speed Megan had only imagined he was capable of. A speed honed in the shadows of war. Sloan drew a concealed pistol. Brandon struck his wrist. The gun clattered across the floor. Sloan swung at him. Brandon countered. They crashed into a metal column, fists landing breaths, sharp years of hatred exploding in violent clarity. Brandon pinned Sloan with a forearm to the throat. "This," Brandon growled, "is for my team." He drove his fist into Sloane's jaw, then another, until Sloane collapsed, stunned and gasping. The Marines swarmed in, securing the traitor in cuffs. Brandon stepped back, chest heaving, the storm inside him finally breaking. And through the hangar doors, Megan ran to him. She didn't hesitate, didn't think, didn't care who watched. She threw her arms around him, and Brandon, exhausted, bleeding, trembling, collapsed into her embrace. For the first time in 7 years, he let himself be held. Megan's voice cracked against his ear. "It's over, Brandon. It's finally over." He closed his eyes, whispering hoarsely, "No, not until Sophie is safe." "She is safe." Megan cupped his face. "Because you're still here." Behind them, the 5 four-star generals stood in solemn silence. Then, without a word, they approached Brandon. General Ellery stepped forward and called out, "Pacific Command attention." Every Marine, every officer, every soldier inside the hangar snapped to rigid stance. Brandon blinked, stunned. General Ellery raised his hand to his brow. The others followed. A unified, flawless salute directed at the man who had carried a nation's burden alone. A salute for the Ghost Commander. A salute for the father who fought for his child. A salute for the hero the world never knew it had. Megan felt tears burn her eyes as she looked at him. Brandon whispered, voice breaking, "I don't deserve this." General Ellery replied softly, "You deserve far more than you've ever been given." The salute held. Long, reverent, transformative. And in that moment, Brandon Cross was no longer a janitor, no longer a ghost, no longer a man defined by loss. He was a soldier, honored, a father redeemed, a survivor welcomed home. But most of all, he was a man finally seen. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving Pearl Harbor washed clean, as if the heavens themselves wanted to wipe away the bloodstains of the past. Sunlight spilled across the base in soft golden waves, gleaming off the runways and rippling across the water like forgiveness. The abandoned hangar hours earlier, a battleground of betrayal, now stood silent behind military tape. Sloane was gone, escorted under maximum security to a federal black site. His arrest had detonated shockwaves throughout national intelligence circles, and investigations would ignite for months. But none of that was Brandon Cross's concern anymore. This morning, for the first time in 7 years, he wasn't a ghost. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't alone. And as he stepped out into the warming sunlight, breathing deeply, the air of a man finally free, he saw her waiting. General Megan Drake, not in full uniform. Today she wore a simple navy blouse under a light field jacket, hair loosely tied back, softer, human, beautiful in a way rank had always overshadowed. She watched him walk toward her with a stillness that made Brandon's heart beat harder. "Morning, Brandon," she said softly. Her voice, usually crisp and commanding, felt warmer today. Lighter. "Morning, General," he replied, her brow lifted playfully. Trying to put distance between us already, he exhaled a small, helpless smile forming. Megan, her stern facade broke instantly into a smile so gentle it almost hurt to look at. They stood there for a long moment, the morning breeze rustling between them, carrying away the last, haunted fragments of their long night. "You slept?" she asked. "A little," he admitted. "Sophie fell asleep on my chest. I think that helped more than anything." Megan's eyes softened. "She was so brave last night." "You were the one who kept her safe," Brandon said quietly. "Thank you." For once, Megan didn't deflect the gratitude with formality. She accepted it with a softness she rarely allowed herself. Just then, a small figure burst from behind the general brown ponytail, flying eyes sparkling. Daddy Sophie sprinted toward him, and Brandon knelt just in time to catch her in his arms. She squeezed him fiercely, her tiny hands clinging to his shirt as if she feared he might disappear again. "I woke up," and you weren't there," she sniffled. I got scared. Brandon hugged her tighter. "I'm right here, sweetheart." "I'm not going anywhere." Sophie pulled back slightly, glancing over at Megan. "Daddy, is she okay now? The lady who was crying last night." Brandon froze. Megan blushed, hard. "I wasn't crying," Megan said quickly, clearing her throat. "There was wind in my eyes." Sophie giggled. "The wind doesn't usually talk, though." Megan's cheeks turned even redder. Brandon tried and failed to hide his smile. The little girl looked between them, eyes bright with the fearless curiosity of children. "You two really like each other," she declared confidently. Megan choked. Brandon blinked. Sophie nodded vigorously. "It's okay. I like her too," she added, leaning her head on Brandon's shoulder. Megan stared at the child, speechless and deeply touched. Brandon stroked Sophie's hair gently. "Sweetheart adults can like each other, but sometimes things are complicated." "Why?" Sophie asked, blinking. Megan opened her mouth to explain, but Brandon lightly touched her arm, stopping her. He turned Sophie so they were face to face. "Because grown-ups have big jobs, big responsibilities, and sometimes it's scary to let people into their hearts." Sophie tilted her head. "But you let me in," Brandon swallowed. "That's because you're my heart," he whispered. She smiled brightly. "Then maybe let someone else in too." Megan's breath caught. An embarrassed silence settled until a Marine jogged toward them. "Commander Cross," he greeted formally, though awe lingered in his voice. "General Ellery asked me to escort you to the main hall. There's a ceremony." Brandon frowned. "Ceremony?" Megan stepped closer. "Brandon, your status has been restored." He blinked. "What?" Megan's voice softened. "Your rank, your record, your honor. They're giving everything back to you. Publicly." Brandon looked down, tears gathering in his eyes, though he blinked them away quickly. "I never wanted recognition," he murmured. "I just wanted Sophie safe," I know Megan said. "But sometimes, healing requires being seen." Sophie held his hand tightly. "Let's go see." The main hall was packed, uniforms of every color, rank, and branch forming a sea of respect. When Brandon entered, conversations halted. Soldiers straightened. Officers saluted. Technicians watched with reverence. He felt frozen, overwhelmed, lost. General Ellery stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today we stand in the presence of a man whose service was erased, whose sacrifice was hidden, and whose courage saved this nation more times than we can publicly acknowledge." A ripple of emotion moved through the room. Commander Brandon Cross Ellery continued, voice steady but heavy. "This country owes you a debt it can never repay." Brandon looked down as Ellery lifted a small velvet box. Inside lay the insignia of his restored rank, polished, gleaming whole. "And though you have declined reinstatement," Ellery said softly, "your honor will never again be buried." A thunderous applause erupted. Brandon blinked through tears. Sophie hugged his leg. Megan stood at his side, proud. When the applause faded, Ellery leaned in. "You earned peace, son. Go live it." Later, as the sun dipped low and the base settled into evening calm, Brandon stood by the shoreline watching waves collapse and rebuild over and over the way his life had. Megan approached quietly. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, for the first time in a long time. They stood together, the silence warm and easy. "Megan," he said finally, "you know we can't." She gently took his hand. "I'm not your superior anymore," she whispered. "Not in this. Not in us." Brandon exhaled sharply, emotion surfacing. "You sure about this?" he asked. "About me." She stepped closer until their foreheads nearly touched. "I choose who you are," she said, "not what your past made you." Sophie ran over, then throwing her arms around both of them in a sudden joyful hug. Brandon wrapped his arms around Megan and Sophie, a fragile, beautiful triangle of healing and hope. The wind brushed softly against them. The ocean glimmered gold. The world, for once, felt gentle. Brandon whispered into Megan's hair. After all the darkness, I finally found the light. Megan closed her eyes, whispering back, and the light finally found you. Together with Sophie's laughter echoing beside them, they watched the last rays of sun dip beneath the horizon, a new beginning painted across the Hawaiian sky. Their future wasn't perfect. It wasn't guaranteed, but it was theirs. A future built on kindness, on healing, on love that rose above rank, past, and pain. And finally, on hope strong enough to carry them home. Before we close today's story, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Our community comes from so many places, and your comments truly bring these stories to life. Feel free to share your state, your city, or even just a, "Hello, I read every message." If this story touched your heart, or if you enjoy quiet heroes, second chances, and uplifting moments of kindness, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue making meaningful stories for wonderful viewers like you. Thank you truly for spending your time with us today. Your presence here means more than you know. Until next time, stay safe, stay kind, and take good care of yourself.